Hello, and thank you for joining us on the Optimal Wealth Podcast, where we discuss creating passive income through real estate. Our mission is to help educate investors on how to grow wealth and invest passively. My name is Jared Alexander, and I am a passive investor, currently in 6 syndications as a limited partner. I am also the founder of Optimal Equity Group, which is a real estate investment firm that was created primarily to help educate the passive investor. We do that in a couple of different ways. One is we provide education to help give you the confidence to get into the passive investing space. And two, each episode we will interview amazing guests that explore the strategies, insights, and secrets used by successful investors. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just starting out on your real estate journey, this podcast is designed to help give you the confidence and knowledge you need to make informed and profitable decisions. Welcome to another episode of the Optimal Wealth Podcast. And today I am super excited to introduce our guest, Aileen Prak. Aileen, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Jared.
It's great to have you, Aileen. So I got to know Aileen when I had the opportunity to interview on her podcast, which is How Did They Do It? Real Estate. And I highly recommend checking that out. It's a great podcast, great resources. You interview a bunch of great guests, and I've benefited a lot from the interviews you've done as well. And just Aileen, if you want, let's go a little bit into your background of how you got into real estate and why you decided to go choose multifamily.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I started out, very path similar to most people that are listening. You go to school, get good grades, go off to get a good job, and then I thought that I was just going to continue working, and all that there was, work the good job, climb the corporate ladder, continue to invest into your 401ks, and then by the time you're 65 or what is it now, 67 or something like that, retire and then live off whatever you've saved and then the 401ks. That kind of all changed after I had my first son, or when I was pregnant with my first son, right? So your outlook of time and what that means and what you want your life to look like changes significantly, I think, when it's not just you who you're focusing on, but now it's a family that you're trying to grow. And you're also focusing on another little person who's dependent on you, and all he knows is just you and wanting to spend all his time with you. And so when we had our first son back in 2018, I remember, we get 3 months of maternity leave. So I got to spend 24 hours a day with him, spending time with him, seeing all the milestones and him growing and everything like that. And after that, after those 3 months were over, I had to go back to work and I would have to put him into daycare. And that was challenging for me and my husband because one, we're putting him in a daycare where you had to entrust that somebody is going to take care of him as much as you were going to take care of him, these strangers. So you had to feel comfortable enough with that. And so once we kind of got over that, and then, you didn't really have any choice but to do that since we both had to work our W-2 jobs, then, we put him in there. It was okay after a couple of weeks. And I remember, like, after a couple of weeks, we get a phone call from the school, the daycare, and they said, "Hey, you have to come pick up your son. He has a high fever." And as a first-time parent, I was very scared. I didn't know what to do. I wanted to rush over and get to him and pick him up as quickly as possible. But it wasn't possible for me at that time because I had van pooled in to work. Because I commute so far every day, I would take a van pool every day back and forth to work. So I didn't have an immediate forms of transportation to go pick up my son. Something similar to my husband as well. He worked far away, so it would still take some time to get to my son. And so, being first-time parents, you kind of feel like you let your kid down a little bit for not being able to get there in time. And so that moment was the point where it triggered my thought process. And I thought to myself, I don't really own my time. I want to be able to be there for my son. I want to be able to pick him up whenever I want to. I want to own more of my time and spend it however I want to spend it. And there must be a better way to do this. And so we started looking at different ways to invest, to grow our money, get a little bit more dependency off off of that W-2 so we can, in case anything were to happen. And then that's how we came upon, investing more aggressively in real estate. And then we ended up stumbling upon multifamily.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Eileen. And I can relate to you. We were just talking before we started this show here that we both have kids similar ages. And I remember that first time at daycare, right, dropping them off. It's nerve-wracking. They're crying, right?
You're crying.
Yeah, right. You're crying, and you don't want to let them go, and yeah, and so yeah, I totally relate to that, and it's interesting, what these aha moments we get, right? And thankfully, so you discovered real estate, and I know you just probably gave a 5 minute overview, which we could spend a whole hour probably uncovering those 5 minutes, right? Of the work and the resources, the education that you put into learning about real estate and multifamily and passive investing, right? So if we could, let's unpack just a little bit about that. So you had that aha moment with your son. Unfortunately, you had to probably find another means of transportation or something, for your son, or didn't get there when you did. So you start down this road of real estate. And so what did that look like? Did you start in single family, or did you go right to multifamily, or what did that look like?
Yeah, so the first thing so I live in California, and it was challenging to find houses or an investment property that cash flowed or that met our investing criteria. And so even though we were looking for some time, we were either getting outbid by, cash offers or higher offers. And so we weren't winning the deals. And so we started to look outside of California. And at that time, we started listening to a ton of podcasts, and trying to gather as much resources as possible to figure out, like, how are other people investing in real estate? Like, what are they doing? And so we just dived into the world of podcasts and just consumed hours upon hours of real estate podcasts, on my commute there, commute back, in between lunch times, night times, everything like that. Whenever I could, I would consume podcasts or I would consume some type of information, trying to figure out what can we do? How can we break into real estate, and how can we start building up that passive income?
It seems like a common denominator in our field, right? Is we all kind of get started in that single family space, but like in California, you got that general rule of like the 1%, right? And it's hard to find anything cash flowing out there. So did you go out of state to look at single families, and did y'all end up pulling the trigger on that?
Right, we did. We ended up buying a couple of turnkey properties out in St. Louis.
Okay.
And then from there, it worked out fairly well. But what we found as we started operating it, there were things that you had to take care of, uh, as of turnover. Once the tenant leaves, you need to clean up the property, you need to maintain it and put it back into good order. And then if there was some issues that the tenant had made that caused a little bit more investment or money that you needed to infuse back into the house to bring it back up to a rentable state, it would have, wiped out some of that cash flow that we had initially built up. And so we looked at single family for some time. We invested in a couple, but it was a little bit not exactly what we were looking for, in terms of the scalability and wanting to grow a little bit faster in what we want to do in real estate. And so we started going to different meetups and listening up to more and more podcasts. And then we came across the term syndications, and we're like, oh, what is this? How does this kind of work? What does it mean? And so we started listening to real estate syndication podcasts and diving into the world of multifamily. And then we're like, oh, so people can buy these apartment buildings, and it's not just big corporations, but it's investors similar to myself, you, regular people can pool their resources together and then be able to purchase something bigger that they would not have been able to purchase on their own. And so that was really intriguing, because instead of now just one house or one single family property, you're able to buy, 10, 20, 50 units plus together as a group. And then you could have a little bit more of a hands-off role and not have to do the day-to-day landlord activities if you didn't want to.
Yeah. And and thanks for clarifying that, Eileen. And I had a similar experience, and I've shared it before on this show, but my like I bought that first single family home and I wanted to scale, right? Okay, now I got to go buy, I mean, my goal was to replace my W-2 income at that time. And, in order to do that, I was looking at 60 or 70 houses because in the market, I mean, I was right around, 2019, right before COVID. I'm cash flowing, I'm finding cash flow on property, but it's 2000, $200 a month, right? And then one thing goes wrong and you get a $4,000, bill and that wipes your cash flow out and you're dealing with the property manager and so on and so forth, right? So, I had a very similar experience to you. It was not as hands off as I thought it was. And, I want to point out, Eileen mentioned podcast probably 3 or 4 times, right? Podcast, it's just such a great resource. For my W-2, I drive around a lot, I commute, and I put my AirPods in or put whatever I can on, and I just listen to anywhere I can. I listen to the free education, that others are sharing about how they did it. And you start getting to know these people at meetups, right, Eileen? And they're just normal people, like you said, like you and I, right? They're just taking action about with things that they're learning, right, as a result of these podcasts and diving deeper into that. Um, yeah, I think it's great that you pointed that out, and I just really want to hammer that down. I mean, there's tons of education out there, so definitely educate yourselves, but then just take an action, right? Even in that first single family, for me, it just got my foot over the threshold, right? And it got me, networking with others. I, started getting to meetups. I wanted to learn more, and then we hear about this word of syndication, which I don't know about you, Eileen, but I never heard about that until I went to that meetup one day. I'm like, what is this? Right. And so if you could, tell our listeners, what is syndication and how did you go about finding your first passive investment?
So, syndication is essentially just a group of people in simple terms. It's just a group of people who pool their resources together, whether it be their knowledge, background, expertise, or capital, and then be able to come together in like an LLC and then purchase a property like a multifamily apartment unit together. And then now you're able to reap the benefits of investing in a multifamily property where you get cash flow, or you can also gain the upside for the appreciation once you sell it as well. So there's different roles in a syndication that you could essentially be part of. You can break it into two different parts: the general partners or the limited partners. The general partners have the active forms of engagement where they're putting together the deals, securing the debt, the loans, finalizing all the paperwork, and essentially doing all the landlord activities, the maintenance and the asset management of it, and really operating the property. And then as a limited partner or passive investor, you really don't have an active role in the property. What you're doing is you're just investing in your capital, say like, 50,000 or 25 or 100,000, whatever the minimum is. And then you sit back and you get email communication from the operators to see how the properties are doing, but you as a passive investor don't have an active role in the investment. So it's more passive. There's some more things that you need to do up front in terms of, learning about it, making sure you're investing in the right thing, maintenance, and just following up and making sure you're understanding how the property's performing month over month. But other than that, it's more a pure, like a more passive investment than probably like a single family home that you can get into.
Yeah, no, thanks for that clarification. And would it would you say that this is probably the most hands-off, investment you can do as far as being passive that you found?
Yes. I mean, like everybody has a different terms of what passive investment means, right?
Yep.
But in terms of being as far removed as possible from the day-to-day operations, this form of investing is probably the most quote unquote passive investment that I've come across so far, at least.
True mailbox money, right?
Right.
You hand your money to somebody and you collect a check monthly, quarterly, or however the distributions are paid. So yeah, no, again, thanks for that clarification. And so if you would, let's dive into if you don't mind, your first passive investment, your due diligence with the operator. We always hear about this know, like, and trust factor, and how did you go about trusting the operator you ended up putting your money with?
So speaking of podcasts, I think a lot of I've talked a lot about podcasts so
Yeah.
far, but because I listen to so many different podcasts, there was one particular podcast host where I felt really connected to, and so I would listen and consume his content very consistently. And so over time, you start to get a sense of their values, what they're looking for, how they're operating, what does investing mean to them, and do they align to what you're looking for? And that's all just through listening to their conversations with other people. And so from there, after hearing, for several months just listening to the same person over and over and over again, I felt like, oh, well, I feel a good connection with this person. I feel like I can generally see or understand where they stand, what their values are. And, for the first time investment, I feel like I could potentially trust them with my first investment, that they won't take my money and run away with it. And so it was a big commitment, big first step. So I made a phone call and I reached out directly and set up some time with them to get to know them personally on a one-on-one basis, and then to hear their voice, to know that they're a real person. I before I even did that, I looked up, there's a ton of resources out there on what are some questions that you can ask an operator before you have that conversation. You can get a list of those questions and just go down them if you don't know where to start. And then just interview them, just get to know them and figure out, do you, like you mentioned, know, like, and trust this person? And then after having a couple of conversations with them, then I ask them like, oh, can you add me to your list of investments if you have anything upcoming? I'd like to see it, review it, and if it meets my criteria, I'd be interested in investing with you. And so then I get on his list, and then a short while later, a deal comes across that was really interesting to us, and then we decided to get on it and take that first step and that first action and invest passively with that person.
Yeah, and now when you were talking about your criteria, right? Because I think this is important, especially people just kind of getting started in this space. You really want to figure out your goals. What are you looking for? What type of investor are you? They talk about the cash flow investor versus the growth investor. And so, as far as your criteria, were you looking at more of cash flow at this point, or just compounding, kind of more of that growth, building your net worth? What did that look like?
So in general, I've always been a very conservative investor. So my thing is, I don't mind if I don't make, a 3x return or a 2x return, but I want to invest in something that I can minimize as much of the risk as possible, and that I can make sure that there is a low chance of me losing my money. Of course, with any investments, there's always that opportunity, that chance that you could lose everything. But there are ways that you can minimize that risk. And so when evaluating a deal, it's looking to see, is it cash flowing? What is the business plan? And then, of course, the metrics are important as well, but it didn't mean as much to me as, more so of, do I trust the operator? Does his business plan make sense? What is he going to do if things go south? How is he going to protect my capital? And then when I got that feeling and I felt that comfort from him and those questions were answered, that made me feel comfortable with investing in that first deal.
Yeah, that makes sense. And that's the importance of investing with a good operator because, anybody can take a good deal, but if they don't know what they're doing, they can run it down quick, right? And
Right.
so, no, that's great. And as far as, with when you talked about risk, right? So, mitigating the risk, I think that's important to touch on because, this is what really drew me into the multifamily space. And we kind of go back to single family, right? You got one tenant in there. Well, for some reason they get evicted or they're not paying rent, you're getting 100% of zero each month, right? Well, on a multifamily, you say 50 unit, 100 unit, right? If just say 10 people aren't paying the rent or, it's 90% occupied, you still got rent coming in each month, right? And it's brick and mortar asset. And if you could talk about, I think it's important to also look at, as far as how these properties are comped or they're not comped like a single family, how are they valued? How did they appreciate over time? If would you mind just touching on that real quick, Eileen?
Sure.
Yeah.
So with the single family property, when you're evaluating them or when you're looking at purchasing a single family property or selling a single family property, you're looking at your neighbors, the houses right next door, down the street, the neighborhood over, seeing what the comparables are like. Is it a 3 bedroom, 2 bath? And then what are they selling it for? And you can get something very similar to that price. However, with single family, let's say if the house next door gets foreclosed and that property value now diminishes and it drops significantly, what happens to your property now? That single family property that you invest in also, the value of it also goes down because the house next door, the value went down because it got foreclosed on. Well, with multifamily, it's a little bit different. You can have two very similar multifamily properties right next door to each other, but one could be valued much higher than the other one based purely off of their net operating income. So with multifamily, you're looking at more of a business and how much rent you're bringing in every single month, and then how much are your expenses and what's the net of that. And so when you're looking at that and you're comparing those two, if one property is having a higher net operating income than the other, it's far more valuable than the other property. And so even if one property is, not maintaining it well, maybe they're, significantly vacant all the time, that will diminish the value of that property significantly. But if the property next door, similar size, similar type of property, but they are occupied well, they are bringing in cash flow, they are operating and maintaining the property, they're bringing in net operating income higher than the one next door, that property is valued at a much higher level than the other property it is. And so that also helps to mitigate some of that risk that you were talking about because now it's not based off of comparables. It's based off of how you're operating the property and how much you're bringing in income every single month, every single year.
Right. Which is, that's how banks loan on these properties, right? They're looking at the NOI. But, and back to your point, Eileen, is this is why it's so important to invest in a good operator, right? Because, you want somebody who's going to take that property and execute the business plan and raise and, net operating income on these properties so that, that appreciation does build, you build that equity, which, is good for us as passive investors because that's where we get our payout, right? That's where we get the 2x or maybe 3x, depending if we ever see those times again, right? Returns. But like you said, I mean, even deals right now, I'm happy with just, a double, right? A double or triples are nice, but even a single, like a base hit, right? I mean, these don't have to be home run investments, but I just want a good place to park my money where I am going to generate a little cash flow, a good potential on the back end for, a good payout, but I get the tax benefits, and everything involved there, right? Um, um, well, Eileen, I think I'd like to go ahead and transition. Actually, before I do that, I want to ask you a couple more questions, and then we're going to go to our 4 question fire round. But is is there something you wish you knew before you started investing in these types of assets that you would like care to share to the listeners?
I think in the early stages, you kind of listen to podcasts, you educate yourself up to a certain point before you take that action. So you can't know everything until you actually start to invest, and then you start seeing what else you don't know, because before you invest, you don't know what you don't know, right? So over time, what I've learned now is a little bit more about the debt structure. And I wish that, before getting started and maybe some of the passive investments deals that I have gone into, understanding that a little bit more about the debt structure. Maybe if they have a floating rate or a fixed rate debt, some type of balloon payments, and how they incorporate that all into the deal itself, and what does that mean? And so over time, as you start to invest in more and more, the debt structure starts to make it more and more sense. But early on, that part of it was never my forte, my strong point on understanding that piece of it. But it's a huge component of it. And especially now in today's market, you're seeing how important what kind of debt is placed on a deal. And that's going to help make or break, some of those different operators that are out there right now, based off of what kind of debt structure they've placed onto those properties. So I kind of wish I knew more about that side of it.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. Kind of getting into this, you just hear the floating rate debt, and it's like, okay, that makes sense. And nobody's expecting interest rates to, climb up as rapidly as they did, and it looks a little different, and especially this 2024, I think they said like over $1 trillion these loans are coming due, which
Right.
yeah, unfortunately, some people are going to be hurting from that, but it's bittersweet, right? Because it's unfortunate, but fortunately, there's going to be a lot of opportunity coming for these operators to come in and scoop these up. And I tell you, Eileen's been super humble, but she is actually active as well now, right? So she is an operator, and knowing some of this, and you're looking in. I'm sure y'all are going to be taking advantage of the opportunities coming up in the next coming year. Really 6 to 18 months, um, if not before. But if you just for my own curiosity, how are y'all? If what's the recent deal you've done, and or moving forward, how are y'all looking to structure that debt? Are you looking at bridge loans, or are you looking more at the fixed rate right now?
Yes. So fortunately for us, most of our deals have all been fixed debt rate, fixed debt. And so the latest deal that we did was earlier this year in 2023. We did a 34 unit property in Henderson, Las Vegas. And so that one was an agency debt. And so that one, we knew to place long-term debt on that one as well. But going forward, yes, the debt structure is really important. And so we're wanting to make sure that we get long-term debt placed onto it going forward, and then making sure that their fixed payments, or working with the lenders more and more so that you're getting the best rates as possible. And then try to lock it in as much as possible, because that floating rate debt, as you can see, for the last 1, 2 years, it's been crazy. And so for us as passive investors as well, it's something that we are very cautious about getting into now. We don't do investments with the floating rate debts. If they do, they need to have some type of cap or some type of exit plan or something like that on top of that. But that's the plan going forward, is just being really cautious, making sure that we have enough reserves, making sure that we're putting enough uh, debt on there, and we're not over leveraging ourselves.
Yeah. No, yeah, that makes sense. And it's I just you may reminded me of something when you said reserves. Is a lot of these operators that were over raising, right, and having reserves got a lot of criticism, right? But now, with the interest rates, and it was actually nice to have that bucket of reserves to be able to stabilize the property when the cash flow wasn't coming in as projected, right? So yeah, it's definitely, it's just, like you said, you learn as you go, right? You learn from mistakes and just try to capitalize on these opportunities moving forward. Which is like anything, right? It's trial and error, but you don't know until you know, and until you get involved in this stuff, right?
Right.
Um, all right, well, let's go ahead and transition now into our fire round. So I'm going to ask you 4 questions here. And then the first one is, could you recommend a book for investors just starting out and another book that is particularly good for cultivating a positive mindset?
So one of the books for passive investors that I found really helpful, and I think it does a really good job of explaining the different metrics and formulas and how things are structured in syndications, is The Hands-Off Investor by Brian Burke. That one is a fantastic one that I would highly recommend passive investors start off reading. And then one for mindset that you said for positive mindset. I really highly recommend Who Not How by Dan Sullivan. That one is a great book because it puts you in a mindset to think a little bit differently. Because sometimes we get stuck on the how do I get things done? But a lot of times we don't need to know the how. We need to figure out the who can get us there and who can I reach out to help me get to that next step or figure out this problem, solve this issue. And it's really about the who and not necessarily the how. So those are the 2 books that I would recommend.
Yeah, no, great books, great books. Yeah, the who not how especially. It's just like, and it, like we were sharing earlier, just about that mindset. We're raised a certain way, and get a job, go to college, retire at 65 or 67 now, and that's just the mindset we grow up in. But these books just, I mean, they can just totally get you a different perspective, and instead of you having to figure everything out, it's kind of like how I was right, do it. If you want anything done right, you got to do it yourself, right? But there's actually a lot of qualified people in a lot of different areas that can do, and take advantage of your weaknesses and really help you grow, right? And you can, I mean, yeah, he gives tons of examples in that book. So, anyways, yeah, go check out the book. All right, so next question: what is the practical first step the audience can take to explore the space of passive investing?
I would say, other than listening to podcasts and get educated, I think we've talked about that enough. I think the other next step is to try to get on as many lists as possible from different operators and just start evaluating deals. You don't have to invest in anyone right away, but getting the practice of reviewing the deals, seeing what an OM looks like, an operating memorandum, seeing what a private placement memorandum looks like, understanding and getting familiarized with the numbers will really help you make an educated decision later on when you decide to invest in a deal.
Yeah, no, great advice. And, yeah, because looking at those 50 to 80 page documents can be scary, right? For sure. But yeah, definitely understanding that and then taking the step to get on the phone with the sponsor, and talking to them and asking them different questions and yeah, just kind of learning what you can from that. So yeah, no, great advice. I like that. And then what is a daily habit you practice keeping you on track towards your goals?
Daily habit is sometimes when you have these goals in your mind of what you want to achieve, these milestones, it can kind of get really daunting. And so I make sure that every day I just do one thing on my list, just to get that done at least. So even if I cannot accomplish everything that I want to get done on that day, but if there's one thing that's going to make me feel like, I've moved the needle a little bit, or I've talked to somebody, or if I've made a new connection. That's the one thing that's going to keep me propelling, keep me motivated in the business, keep me motivated in investing. So just even if you feel like at your worst or whatever like that, just do one thing that day that will move you towards your next milestone or your goal.
That's great. And there's also a book on that called The One
One
Thing,
thing,
right?
right? That's
Yeah,
very true.
yeah. All right. You know what? I'm gonna sneak another question in here for you, Eileen, because and again, because we kind of have a similar you know, similar age kids and everything. So how has investing in real estate created more freedom for you and your family?
Other than the financial side of things, which has been great, the other thing is the mindset of thinking about time and how do you want to structure your life and what does that mean? And so when I started in real estate, that really set my pace and my tone and my how I want to live my life and how I want to show up for my kids every day in their lives. And that really set that foundation for it. And so I think that has really helped me a lot is, the thought process about time and what does that mean and how do I want to spend it and who I want to spend it with. That has been the biggest takeaway I have, from investing in real estate.
Yeah. Yeah, I love it. And I think that'll kind of tee this up for our last question. So if you can be remembered for one thing, what would that be?
I honestly, I think it would be with my family.
Yeah.
I'd want to be known for my with my family because that's like the first thing that I always base everything around, my time, my life, everything that I do is all around my family. I want to make sure that I spend the time, the quality time I have with them, and that I look back and I never, think about what if or, oh, I should have done this with them or should have done that. And so, you know, that's what I would want to be remembered by.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. And I had a feeling you were going to say that too, right? And because, that's, and we have a lot of similar, you know, things in common there. That's my why, right? Which it sounds like that's your why is I want to do this, to create the financial freedom to be able to spend time with my family and just be present with my kids and, right. And that's what it's all for, right? I mean, we can't never get that time back. And just before this call, we were talking about the Christmas, and you know, it's just getting to see my son wake up for Christmas and see the Santa gifts and what Santa, and just be so excited, right? And the joy that brings them. I mean, that's what this is all for, right? It's just to be there with the family and live these moments. So
Right. And really value the time that we have here.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, well, Eileen, great, great to get to talk to you again. I just, yeah, really enjoyed having our conversation today, and look forward to definitely catching up here in the future. But until then, thank you for our listeners today, and until next time. Thank you for listening to the Optimal Wealth Podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please be sure to rate, review, subscribe, and pay it forward by sharing with a friend. Most importantly, be sure to optimize your results and take massive action on what you have learned here today. For more, visit optimalequitygroup.com.